everyone.
Caroline.
Welcome to wherever we are. 6B Garden in the Lower East Side of New York City. My name is Charles Frizzell. I'm president of Lungs, which is the Lower East Side of United Neighborhood Gardens, which is a network of the 50 plus gardens in this neighborhood. So we're really happy you guys could make it, and we look forward to a very robust discussion with these wonderful panelists. And and I'll turn it over to Carolyn now. Thank you all for coming.
My name is Carolyn Reckless. I'm a gardener here in the Lower East Side. I'm the Artistic Director of Art Way Sida Foundation, and we want to welcome you. We want to do an Indigenous land acknowledgement for the Lenni Lenape people and the local activists, both alive and past, who have helped to steward these existing and extinct green spaces. Okay, I would like to introduce Ray Figueroa, who is the moderator to this event, and I'll turn it over to him.
All right. Well, thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Charles. And thank you all who came out on such a hot day. But interestingly enough, right here where we're sitting, it's providing some relief, meaning that this is part of the beauty, part of the power, part of the love of being in ecological relationship with Mother Earth. In this case, in an urban environment, we call it a community garden. So that's what we're community gardens is one iteration, one expression of GreenSpace. We have here just a very rich gathering of individuals that promise, let's just say that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It's going to be really exciting. I encourage all of you to really listen through all of the remarks, digest all of the perspectives. One, because the issues that we're dealing with, that is to say green space and urban policy, don't lend themselves to soundbite analysis that we might get in some other circles. They really require this that's happening today. And what's happening today is the community not just exercising and developing its literacy around policy implications, but more fundamentally, the community asserting it's really the community's indigenous right to be determining, to be developing, to be stewarding green spaces, because we as a folk live with the decisions, the consequences of decisions as they relate to land use in the city. And so this is very important for all of us, myself included, to be taking this type of an initiative to really become as literate as possible. Super quickly, Ray Figueroa. I run a community garden program in the South Bronx. It's a youth farm. I run a community-based alternatives to incarceration initiative through the youth farm, where we engage young people who have either been running through the courts, court adjudicated, or have been formally incarcerated. And so, we are going to be touching on some of the social aspects, social co-benefits of community gardens. I'm just sharing that as one type of social benefit as a community garden being responsive to the needs, the priorities, the aspiration of our local community. I also happen to be president of the New York City Community Garden Coalition. I had a colleague just now saying, hey, what's happening with the coalition? Well, we're looking to regroup and have our general meetings again, so stay tuned for that. I'm also on the faculty of Pratt Institute's Graduate Center for Planning and the Environment at the School of Architecture at Pratt. And what's fantastic about that is that at the graduate level, I'm able to access all kinds of research dollars, action research dollars that allow for projects that really have an impact. And one of the projects is something called Designating Community Gardens as Critical Environmental Areas. active project at the city level, active project at the state level in terms of legislation. This project has been going for a couple of years now. Grad students generated data, and it's informing the efforts of our sister that has brought in, that is to say the environmental law firm Earth Justice is working with us. And so the idea is to designate community gardens as critical environmental areas. How that is relevant here is, we're here to explore policy possibilities for enhancing protections for the land, for enhancing, and this is more than, this is green space, but it's really a community cultivated place that has meaning for each of us in a very special way. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. What I would like to do now is actually move forward and have our esteemed panelists respectively introduce themselves. We're going to begin with Wendy Brout. Okay, I have the names listed, so yes.
We know who we are. It's
okay. Oh my goodness.
I'll be the Wendy, and if anybody wants to wear the hat when they're speaking, they can. I'll stand up so it's easier to hear. I'm a 30 or so year resident of the community. I'm the director of a project called Green Map System. We help people map sustainability locally all over the world. What is one of the very first things they look for is community gardens. We made the symbol for that the heart. And to me, it's all about love. So I'm involved with Siempre Verde Garden and many, many green projects around the community. I'm delighted to be here, and I want to acknowledge that we're on Lenape Hoking land. And that imagine 500 years ago, what were they gardening on this spot?
Thank you, Wendy. Like to proceed now. Amy.
Hi.
Burkhoff.
I'm Amy Burkhoff, and I moved to New York as an urban artist in 1979 and have lived in the same fifth floor walk up in the East Village ever since then. One of the first things that I tried to get involved in when I moved here was looking for a place to have contact with dirt and have contact with neighbors. And that led me to community gardening. And I actually had the third plot in this place, which was made with beams from the buildings that came down before we had the little 4 by 8 foot plots. And that interest indirectly led me to a whole nother area of interest in plants and biology. And I ended up going back to school, and now I'm on the biology faculty at City College of New York.
Fantastic. Thank you, Amy. Next we have Jean Kim from the East River Esplanade.
Thank you, Ray. My name is Jean Kim. I'm relatively new in this space. I'm the new head of the East River Esplanade Conservancy. We serve the Upper East Side and East Harlem neighborhoods. But my background, we're a conservancy. My background is actually, I started as a immigrant rights and labor union organizer. So I'm very much been in the conversation of, equity and bringing communities together. So, and then I went on to, run local political campaigns and, do advocacy work, lobbying for City Hall on behalf of organizations like the Brooklyn Bridge Park Conservancy, Reach Out and Read, a variety of organizations. And last week I hosted our first gardening day on the Upper East Side on 100th Street and the East River. It's a pollinator garden. So I know if for some reason you guys, cycle or walk over that way, please check it out. I think it takes, a week for it to bloom or a couple weeks?
It all depends on what you planted.
What you planted.
You
okay, so I'm like new into this.
Be patient.
We had the gardening experts here. So thank you very much for having me as part of this panel.
Thank you, Jean. Next, Joseph Reverb from the Elizabeth Street Garden.
Hi everyone, I'm Joseph. I'm the director of Elizabeth Street Garden. We're a community garden in Little Italy, and we've been at risk for quite a long time, so 10 years, and we're working to save the garden as a conservation land trust, and we've been caught up in quite a heated debate over where housing has been pitted against GreenSpace, and our whole premise is that we can actually achieve more of both without either coming at the expense of one another. And so that's been a big push for us. We also have a volunteer-based nonprofit, and we offer a lot of community events, programming, different things with local businesses and local organizations within the community, and then also just 20,000 square feet of green space in Little Italy, which is actually the district is quite underserved for parks in general, but also green space specifically, because a lot of the parks within our district are paved. So we're really pushing to preserve this space and actually have put forth with the community board and the local representatives an alternative to achieving the housing that's needed without destroying the garden at all. And so that's been my work. I'm a New Yorker from Brooklyn originally, and I grew up between the Lily and Brooklyn. And yeah, I'm really excited to be on the panel, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Joseph. Next we have Lynn.
I'm Lynn. For much of my career, I was an assistant commissioner at the Parks Department under 4 different mayors. The first phase of my career, I was the chief spokesman for the agency, really its lobbyist, both with the public and with other elected officials, the borough presidents and the city council. In another phase of my career, I was working in field operations, and for a while was in charge of forestry and horticulture. At another time, I was overseeing the community gardens. And then in the final phase of my career, I was doing long-term planning work, including preparing all of the public recreation portions of Mayor Bloomberg's Plan YC, the schoolyards to playgrounds project. That was mine. And perhaps one of the better equity proposals in the city's history. And today we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. Clearly we're preaching to the choir.
Thank you, Jack. And last but certainly not least, Carlos Martinez, the new Executive Director of Green Thumb.
Thank you, Ray. Good afternoon all. My name is Carlos Martinez. I'm the director of NYC Parks Green Thumb. As many of you know, Green Thumb is the program of the City of New York that supports and sustains community gardens across the city. We support over 550 community gardens. That means over 20,000 volunteer gardeners. My background is in environmental administration and urban planning as well. And I have only worked with 3 mayors so far. So thank you for the invitation today. Thank you.
Well, with that, let's just jump right in. And I should have asked Carlos just to stay standing, or seated. We want to first get a sense of green spaces. So this first question, albeit everyone can answer, but it's going to be directed at Carlos. Let's define green space. How can you give us a rundown of the types of spaces that are supported and maintained by Green Thumb?
Thank you, Ray. Green Thumb maintains, as you said, public accessible open space, and that means community gardens. Community gardens are very unique spaces in the city. They are cared by volunteers. They're not getting paid for the work that they do, and they've been doing this for over 40 years. Green Thumb is only a 44-year-old organization, and the idea of the principle here is the idea of a partnership between the city, the government, and communities to care for the land, to care for a space. These spaces, every garden is different. And sometimes they grow food. Some of them are urban farms. Some of them are botanical gardens like this one, or a combination of both uses. There are spaces for building community. I think that's the unique part of community gardens. When you go up to a public space, let's say a plaza or a park, there is some type of anonymity there. When you come to a community garden, the first thing that you say hello to the gardener who is in the front of the gate. So there's a different feeling there, the sense of connecting and with a rich culture of these unique spaces. So that's how I would define community garden.
Thank you. Wendy, could you add from your perspective of having mapped these type of spaces, and what do you see as green spaces?
We're so lucky here that we have lots of different types of spaces, right? There's squares, we have new open streets, we have all kinds of POPs, privately owned public space even count. We have, I would like to, and we have cemeteries. I don't know if you all think about cemeteries as open green space, but we actually created an icon for them, eco-spiritual, because they were both. It's sometimes the oldest plants in the community, and you might see species there that don't appear anywhere else these days. So that's an example. Campuses, including NYCHA campuses. Reused infrastructure projects are around. There's forest grounds. I'd really like to see all these places more opened up, and even created a gateway concept during COVID, that we need a new city or some group to help people find all these kinds of open space that we have. There's an incredible richness here. And I don't know about you, but during COVID, I went to a different park in every borough every month that I'd never been to before, and I barely touched the pile of possibilities. And I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that, but one of the things that strikes me is our connection to land. Once we work on it, we all feel a connection to it, even if it's a one-day experience, like I've had working on street tree beds. So I check those trees all the time now. But it's a great thing.
Thank you. Please.
I have one short
Thank you,
addition,
yes.
but probably won't be represented by anybody else here, but I'll take the opportunity to make a plug for Vacant Lots, which is something that we don't see or think a lot about in New York City, but they can be tremendous value, both in terms of permeable surface, which we'll talk a little bit about later, but also in terms of biodiversity. Over on the East River, I brought a class of insect ecologists over there before they bulldozed the Pier 42 area, and they walked, it was 8 students, they walked from one end right below the East River Park to where the pier is with a sweep net. They had never collected before, had no experience. This was their first experience. And they got like 100 different insect species. So, and part of that was because this was an untended place and a non-manicured place, which actually developed to the point where it just had tons of resources to support biodiversity. So,
well, Amy, while you're at it, the next question here is for you. Since you've been talking about these mature and robust ecologies on the waterfront, can you tell us about the importance of spaces from an ecological? Can you elaborate more on what you've just been talking about from an ecological perspective?
Yeah, thank you. So, I think first and foremost, one thing that we tend to overlook that has become of great importance to everybody in the past couple of decades is where there are gardens, the ground is permeable, right? And so in our age of thinking about increasing flooding, this has become increasingly important. The fact that when storm waters hit permeable ground, those waters are not forced into our sewage system where they can lead to overflows of raw sewage into our waterways. And when that stormwater hits permeable ground, it can percolate through the soil, and then it's sucked up by plant roots and brought up through the plant and released back into the atmosphere. And en route, that is helping to fuel the process by which plants take carbon in from their surroundings and fix it into compounds that keep it out of the atmosphere and address the root causes of climate change. So that's number one. Number two, biodiversity. And this, I think, all of our parks and gardens harbor a really surprising amount of biodiversity, but particularly in gardens where gardeners everybody wants to one-up their neighbor, right? So everybody wants to plant something new and different, and you have a tremendous amount of diversity in plants in the community gardens. And when you have that diversity in plants, you have a corresponding diversity in insects. And that works its way throughout the entire food web. So things that might not do very well outside of urban settings can actually do really well in urban settings like community gardens and our local parks. And, they're not necessarily getting whacked with pesticides. They may not have as many predators around. And so we're actually able to host a surprising number of things that are rare or critically imperiled outside of the gardens. And that, to me, is a really wonderful way that we can do something constructive to help things other than ourselves, because we really are able to provide these refuges for biodiversity.
Well, I think that's brilliant. I just wanted to add, in terms of this rich biodiversity, that there are food-producing plants, i.e. that are cultivated from an agricultural perspective. So while we're realizing all of the benefits, while Amy described all of the benefits that are being realized through these permeable surfaces, through these plants and these trees, another benefit in the process of filtering air and gathering stormwater and preventing runoff mitigation is the production of food at the same time. I would just add that food production at a hyper-local level, neighborhood, community level, is going to become an increasingly salient and relevant consideration because of something that I'm sure everyone has heard about, and that is the food supply chain issues. It's going to actually get worse. And so what community gardens are doing are providing a model of leadership in that regard for biodiversity and actual community sustainability. I wanted to move to Jean. If from your perspective, I know that you've been with the Conservancy, the East River Conservancy now for a couple of months?
Yes.
Yes. But from your perspective, what have you observed as the primary co-benefits, physical, mental, and otherwise, of the spaces that you are stewarding?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, personally, I live on the Esplanade with a view of it, every day, and I can just tell you.
Lucky you.
I know, it is lucky me, because, I have lived in spaces right where cabs are going by every night, and this is much nicer. But so my husband and I, we would walk, especially during the height of the pandemic, on the promenade. I live on 78th Street, going upwards towards Gracie Mansion and beyond. And much of that, unfortunately, past Gracie Mansion is not so developed. But on the other hand, I did have access to this beautiful space. And it kept my sanity during that period. It was not only like, and the gyms were closed, so this was an opportunity to just, get out of the house, breathe some fresh air, and also, have an opportunity to gain some sanity away from, escape from the house. So, I mean, I know a lot of people, probably, experienced the similar thing. So now as a new, head of the, Esplanade, and we serve 60th to 120th Street, our focus is to really continue that development and create an accessible and safe space for everybody to, enjoy the Esplanade. Other communities, from talking to people who live in, Chinatown, and, I have a lot of, friends, they don't have that type of access. And so I think there's like a tug of war between preserving these spaces, but also being creative about and thinking about how we can create new spaces, especially when you have like so much gridlock and traffic and density. And we have that all throughout New York City, but I just know it's especially, gets critical, in the Lower East Side and Chinatown areas, it's even worse. So, but overall, the health impacts, and I know that I'm preaching to a pro, gardening and green audience here, but the health impacts are many. The physical, mental respite, that we experience from being able to, and the soothing nature of nature, and then the oxygen, and studies have proven that this actually decreases overall healthcare costs because of the preventive nature of communal socializing, communal being with nature, and also being inspired by others when they see others in a green space, either doing physical activity or communing with nature and learning about ecology. So the benefits are many, and I think that's what we really need to highlight, that this is not just about green and gardening, but this is about the quality of life of our entire city and for all residents. And I think that's the message that we kind of need to really expand it to.
Thank you so much, Jean. I've been, I have to say, these spaces are more than just mere landscaping amenities, in cities that a real estate developer can point to and say, hey, you have a green space there. It's much more. And you just so eloquently, thank you, really just relayed the richness and the depth and the resonance of what these spaces mean for individuals as well as for communities. They actually bring us back to ourselves and keep us in a place that is actually quite full of beauty and quite wholesome for our spirits. Joseph, I was wondering if, we've heard about the physical, we've heard about the mental. Could you, from your perspective, Elizabeth Street is just known for cultural programming, and if you could just build on what Jean was talking about, because I've observed Elizabeth Street, folks come in and they do spend time communing, if you will. It is a respite, but if you could elaborate on the cultural dimensions of programming out of a community garden.
Absolutely. In New York, I feel like there's a sense of the sense of community can almost feel diminishing, that it's being diminished quite quickly as neighborhoods change. Not always, but in a lot of cases. And gardens are the land of the commons, where people can come together, and that is the opposite of that. That is what holds together a community. And so first and foremost, having the space to do it, but also having a beautiful space, also having a space of nature where there is the mental health benefits, where there is the socioeconomic benefits, and where there is, there's agriculture, there's nature. All of this offers that really, it's like the purest opportunity for people to come together. And so, within that, we have a lot of programming in the garden. Something we're very adamant about is keeping that programming free and open to the public. And that's really important, especially now. New York, it's hard, few and far between is a free amenity that's not either being capitalized on or have some form of commercial thing put in your face. And so we really try to have our programming be as accessible as possible. And I think specifically we have a lot of focus on arts and cultural aspects like live music, poetry. Since we're all gardeners or garden lovers or nature lovers, gardens assume such. Gardens are inspiring, and so when you're in a place of inspiration, when you're in a place of community, that's when I think people are most inspired and most creative. And so we have a huge artistic community. Painters, photographers always come to the garden to create work, and we've tried to let that sense of let it all happen organically. So for instance, we noticed there were a lot of painters and fine artists coming to the garden, so we created a call to artists where we then promoted that work, and we started building quite a large platform. And so we would promote the work, promote the artists, and that in turn creates a new sense of community and a new branch. And so this is like an ever-expanding system of people connecting with each other. The live music is also similar. So we have musicians come, local musicians, but musicians, we've had quite substantial musicians in terms of their notoriety. They've come as well and they've performed. And so you have street buskers playing in the same place that Patti Smith plays. And you have everyone kind of, and it's open to everyone. And the poetry is similar. We work with our local bookstore, McNally Jackson, and people can submit it. So it creates a new platform for people But it really does hold together that sense of community, which, especially in Little Italy, now that it's called Nolita, but it's Little Italy, you know, that feeling of disconnect can be easily magnified, and so this is the opposite of that. This is that feeling of connection.
I'm just really, I don't know about you all, but I'm really enjoying this this conversation, if you will. Thank you for sharing, particularly about the art, performing, graphic arts, and I'm looking at Carolyn. Art is just such an important aspect of our lives in terms of really just providing us perspectives that expand our perspective, A, B, and that, you know, really remind us we're not crazy. We do have an opportunity to express ourselves, and art and artists give us permission to do that. So it is a place of respite, it is a sanctuary, but it is a place where there is a potential for meaningful self-expression. So we're going to take questions for the audience.
I was going to just ask you if you could speak up a little bit.
Oh, speak up a little bit? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, for the benefit of our audience. Well, we're going to shift gears slightly to looking at legal structures and policy as they relate. And this question, so thank you so far. Jack, can you tell us a little bit about, from your...
I'd rather go over my notes.
Go over your notes. History of green spaces, how they came to be designated as such, and how do you see the significance of these green spaces in contemporary New York City?
Well, the good news is that the proposition has been accepted universally today that green spaces are essential to healthy cities. It doesn't mean that we get all the resources that we would like, because education needs them, healthcare needs them, there are many needs of any locality. But the basic idea that you need green space, I've played host to delegations, government officials from more than 60 different countries over the years, and it's not even debatable whether green space is essential. The devil is in the details. When you get to one particular green space, people start to fight. But the basic principle is accepted, and that's enormously helpful to our cause, that is true. Wendy mentioned cemeteries, which are an interesting example over the years. Cemeteries were the forerunners of today's public parks. The rural cemeteries movement got started in the 1830s, and the problem was that people at the time in the medical profession believed that disease was caused by something called miasma, bad air.
Right.
Well, if you planted all your dead bodies after a typhoid epidemic or a yellow fever epidemic or a smallpox epidemic, which occurred periodically in New York City and virtually every other city across the world, what did people think was emanating from all of those dead, diseased bodies? So you ended up with the rural, it's called that, the rural cemetery movement, where they moved cemeteries further from the center of the city. Also, by the way, as a byproduct, freeing up developable real estate in the center of the city. So it was a twofer. But when things like Mount Auburn in Cambridge, Massachusetts, just next to Boston, or Laurel Hill in Philadelphia, which is now part of the Fairmount Park district, or here, Greenwood in Brooklyn, when you develop them, before you start burying people, what do you have? You have a public park. That's what it looks like, and that's how people started to use them. And that helped to fuel the demand for public parks, which were fulfilled in places like Central Park, only the second park of its kind, developed by and for the public at a standard equal to what nobles had enjoyed previously. Second in the world. The first was Birkenhead in Liverpool, England. And Central Park inspired every city in this country to say, well, if we're going to be a first-class city, we have to have a Central Park. And so they may have called it something different. St. Louis, it was Forest Park. But that was very important to the historical development of parks. and New York, I don't just get visitors from other countries. I get them from throughout the country, and in fact, I go to one or two park conferences each year in a different part of the country. We are the envy of most other localities in terms of protections that we now have for our public lands. A former colleague of mine who for years ran the California state parks system after she left New York City always lamented the fact that the laws that helped her do her job here in protecting our parks, she didn't have them out there. So in spite of the things that we would like to see better protected, we're much better off than most other localities. That's the reality. And Ray has some ideas about taking the next step toward getting better. All the opportunities always have challenges. There's always going to be pushback. Sometimes you can't win a big fight, but you can win a small fight. But as Carolyn Reckless, where the hell is Carolyn is here, Charlie Crizel is sitting out there somewhere, over there. Myself, we've been involved with these issues literally for decades. I took my first park job literally 60 years ago. And there are other people here who have very lengthy service. This is not a fight that you win and go home. This is a struggle, like all of life, that continues. And hopefully the younger ones among you will still be doing what you're doing today, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, because the city, the only reason we have the park system that we have today, which is the envy, again, of the country and the world in many aspects, is because of the public demanding that we have that and that we continue to make it better over time.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. So bringing us up to the present, and with that, I'd like to go, Carlos, we began with you, we're returning to you. Can you discuss the structure of community gardens via Green Thumb, and what other structures that you see happening through the city?
Right, so there's a little bit of history as well.
Right.
These gardens were not created by Green Thumb or by the city. These gardens were created by the people, by New Yorkers that we see today, even today. So we want to be respectful of that model, that the spaces were created by them, and we want to be a supporting part of that process, of that partnership. So over the years, there was set up a structure where most of the gardens that we have today are under the jurisdiction of the Parks Department, and those are over 370 gardens. Those gardens function under a license agreement, and that's an agreement that groups like this one signs with the city that basically agrees to some requirements, like open the space 20 hours per week, maintain the space, have programming, and at the same time they get support from the city. Then the other 200 and plus gardens, they have different jurisdictions and different setups and organizing structures. So that's where it gets complicated. So we have gardens under different city agencies, state agencies, privately owned, land trusts, and now we have a new partnership with NYCHA that Green Thumb is supporting 50 community gardens in those spaces. So now we're innovating in that regard, trying to see new spaces, trying to support those communities as well. So that's in a nutshell how the Green Thumb program is structured.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to throw out from around the country, Chicago has Neighbor Space. It's a land trust that's sponsored by the municipality of Chicago, right? And then Seattle, residents there through P-Patch have actually come together in concert with the city to move a bond issue. That is to say, issue a bond to purchase land. So that for community gardening. So I just wanted to put that out there from a legal options perspective. I would like to defer to others and ask others what you see are as other structures, and do these structures respond to some of the threats that community gardens, such as what Elizabeth Street is experiencing, such as what LaGuardia Corners community garden is experiencing, and what other community gardens around the city are experiencing? I don't know if you have other structures in mind, but are they responding to threats? What do you, and also what do you see as a threat, and what is the greatest threat to green spaces? Anyone?
I'll talk about it.
Yes.
So we want to save Elizabeth Street Garden as a conservation land trust, and for us we came to this because we were looking at community land trusts, and you mentioned land trusts before. We were looking at New York Restoration Project. We were looking at Trust for Public Land. Some single site ones like the West Side Community Garden, a little bit more west. And part of what we found with Elizabeth Street Garden is there's a lot of sculpture in it, and there's a lot of unique qualities to it that we felt would be best served under the land trust model, where the city would dispose the land to the nonprofit. And the nonprofit, as I said, is volunteer based, and so in turn it's managed already by the community. And what we've done is we felt we've demonstrated financial independence, which is something that it's quite an issue in terms of funding. A lot of the times with the community gardens that we had worked with in the past. And so one of the things is we realize that right now we have 75% of our budget designated towards protecting the space. If we were working with the city and the city was no longer trying to repurpose the space into affordable housing, which is what it's been pitted against, we would then be able to take that budget and put it all towards expanding upon the work, expanding open hours. We want to build a greenhouse, integrate more of a food security program that we have. And so the land trust really seemed like a model that would give the nonprofit the freedom to move forward with this as quickly as possible, but also protect the unique qualities of what we're trying to do. And this is kind of the underlying point, at no cost to the city whatsoever. And that's where we realize all of this is as a public amenity. We have 100,000 people coming throughout the year annually. We're open through the winter, and the hours change a bit. And so we felt this is a public amenity. It's at no cost to the city, and it's managed by the people in the neighborhood. And that, to us, was the definition of different gardens have different aspects to them, so all of them kind of have to find their unique fit. But for the Elizabeth Street Garden, this is what really seemed to be the glove that fit the hand. And one thing that we put forth a report, and we've been garnering support for it. But it really, the no cost, because right now, most people are aware there's an issue with the parks budget. We're pushing for that 1%. A lot of parks are. I was actually just on a meeting with the Coalition of Parks and City Open Space, and the New Yorkers for Parks representatives were there, and they were talking about we have to push for this, we have to fight for this. Oftentimes, they have to fight for that. I mean, we were saying it's a constant struggle to fight for that funding, and so. In saving Elizabeth Street Garden as a conservation land trust, any money that would be delegated towards Elizabeth Street Garden could then be refocused towards park equity within the district and within the neighborhood, parks that aren't as well served. Little Italy it doesn't need it. It doesn't need park equity. Different parts of Brooklyn, closer to where I grew up, there are different parks that could use it. They could use that funding. Not even so far, SDR parks, Harry Roosevelt Park, could use more funding. It could use more attention. So why not have that be repurposed for the funding that would be delegated for Elizabeth Street Garden, for its gardens and parks around there. That's very specific to what we're dealing with. But we really, I personally feel that the land trust model is, if we're going to talk about community space, if we're going to talk about gardeners who have their hand in the dirt, so to speak, and in the governance, let's talk about having the people governing the space and having the people involved in that to a degree where it's really it's ownership.
Anyone else would like to add? Yes, please. I'm
going to turn the clock back 10 years, 2012. That's the year that I saw a sign on an empty lot in my neighborhood from 596 acres saying, this land is yours. I met 10 neighbors I didn't know. We cut the lock. Charles and helped rally, I think it was 13 gardens came to the community board hearing about it, and we were in. So, and it was super fast. Our timing just happened to work really well with all these things that were going on. We're now permanent. and it's an amazing thing. This is Siempre Verde. I'm sorry, I'm Stanton, an attorney. So below Houston, there aren't as many gardens, but there's just as much need for gardens, I want to say. That same year, I got involved in Sarah D. Roosevelt Park. There's a community building that closed in 1980. When the city was out of money, it was a rec center. We started working that year on community engagement. What could this be? This building is like the gateway to that park. And you know, that park's had 1 million problems since then. I don't know how many. It's really an important park, but it's also because it's on this line and there's been so much internal unsureness, it's really been tough. Could we open up the Stanton building? Well, we raised $1 million, and the bathrooms that we worked on were open January 30th, 2020. So perfect timing for nothing to happen. But now we're in a new spot. We're actually asking, will you move your park storage one building down to Broome Street, which is where all the PEP officers, what is PEP? Police?
Parks Enforcement.
Parks Enforcement for the entire city is sitting in the middle of Sarah D. Roosevelt Park. Can't we get one of those buildings back for the community? So the one that's used for storage for Manhattan, the other for PEP. I think this is the year maybe that we'll be able to go forward. And the last thing I want to say is I've been working in sustainability since '89, and you're absolutely right. People come here for inspiration. And for so many people like me who've gotten to travel and see the impacts of Manhattanization around the world, I would love for the new definition of Manhattanization, or whatever it is we do, to include this community-engaged greening.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Jack?
We're going to have questions at the end.
Oh,
Yes,
yes.
I would like to go back to the Elizabeth Street Garden. One thing that is very, very
So what
unique-
I'm sorry, what we're going to do, we're going to finish this, and then we're going to open it up for all of you. Can you,
I actually have to go on.
you have to go? I'm going to defer to you.
Okay, one very quick statement. The Elizabeth Street Garden is very unique in relation to all the classical sculpture and architectural elements that it has there, which resonates beautifully with the period of the neighborhood. And no other garden has that. And so I think that makes it very, very unique and should be something that should be brought up. Because I have a background in preservation. I helped to stave the Van Shell in Central Park from coming down.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Plus some other different things. But people, they overlook the very uniqueness of, every garden has a unique element about it. Play that uniqueness up. And the uniqueness could be just the population of people that maybe live around that garden, which makes that garden unique. But I applaud everyone, each and every person here in the panel. You guys enrich so many people's lives, and I think you need to be applauded.
Aw, thank you.
I'll applaud you. That's very gracious of you. I wanted to come to you, Amy, and education. And education, if you will, embrace it in the broadest sense of the word. That is to say, specifically what you do institutionally, but more broadly, public education for the community, public education for our elected and public officials. What do you see the role of education coming to bear on the issues that we're discussing?
Well, this is one of the first things that I started thinking about in the past couple of years, is how many people in New York do not understand that plants are alive. That's something that I learned. That is a definite target for an educator.
Yes.
Right? So I work at City College. I teach botany. I teach insect ecology. I try and get students outside as much as I can. I try and get them doing independent research projects within our fabulous park system, because there's just endless opportunities there, and people in parks have been really good about supporting that. You know, kind of weighted down during the pandemic. But I just think that we need to be having experiential education. The student body that I work with, which I don't think is unique, but we have almost as many languages spoken among our students as are spoken at the UN. So we're dealing with students whose families come from all over the world. These guys are not learning the kinds of things that I learned growing up in the Midwest, walking into my backyard and just, learning things without knowing that I was learning things. So they actually aren't going to get a lot of knowledge about the environment, the local environment particularly.
Sorry.
Transmitted through their family.
Yes.
We come here for peace and quiet.
Well, this is presenting in community gardens. We have weather, we have noise, we have sirens. A lot of things that we think should be happening in K-12 don't happen in K-12 because their teachers also don't know very much about the local environment or biodiversity. One quote that I'm not going to quote it because I won't read it, so I'll paraphrase, that I like to go back to was something that was written by Oliver Sacks, the neurologist, about a fellow neurologist who gained binocular vision as an adult. And this meant that as an adult, she went from two-dimensional vision to three-dimensional vision. And she wrote very lyrically about this experience and how there was nothing, you can't read about this experience. It doesn't translate to have somebody tell you about the experience. It's something that you have to go through yourself. And I felt like that when I went through my transition from being an urban artist to being a biodiversity person, that I went through this whole change in perception that was based on my experience. So I think with our students, with our K-12 educators, with our policymakers, with our future policymakers, we really have this huge job and kind of underestimated, under-acknowledged job of trying to make sure that people become environmentally literate, that they become familiar with the common organisms in their local environment. Another thing that I tell students all the time when I'm teaching these classes is if you go through your whole life without knowing anything about plants or insects, which make up the vast majority of biodiversity, to me that is equivalent to spending your whole life living in a foreign country without ever learning the language. You can do it. There are plenty of people who come to New York from other parts of the world and live their life, sequestered in a unilanguage environment, but it's really not a very rich way to experience what's going on around you. So that's what people need to have opportunities to do, to get outside. We need to support this K-12 education. We need to be providing. Biology students don't know that the environment and working in the environment exists. They're all on a biomedical path. And they don't really understand that you could go on some of them are not happy with that path, but they don't understand that there are other trajectories that they could follow. So we need to have more programs that, take kids with a science background. These are focused and bright kids. They're very smart and they're very hardworking, and sort of get them engaged more in the environmental sciences. You weren't at our little prep session. As I mentioned at the prep session, I think one thing that we need is to have a biodiversity SAR or some organization that has standing to advocate for biodiversity, because I don't feel that we as little individuals really have that standing. So
I wanted to build on the point, 2 points that you just made, Amy, and that the gentleman made when he talked about let's build up the uniqueness, really highlight and lift up the uniqueness, and your point about experiential learning. And you were making the point in relationship to students, formerly in an educational setting. How about experiential learning for our policymakers? That is to say, how do we, this gentleman was building up.
That's what I would love.
Right. In other words, inviting them out. There have been some politicians this long time ago. In order for me to understand the issue of poverty, I'm going to spend a month living in this apartment in Harlem. Well, how can we invite our elected representatives and policymakers to spend a month, an ethnographic, experiential opportunity, learning opportunity, because there's nothing like feeling and touching. And feeling and touching folks in cultivating relationships. To be sure, what happens, and this is something, all too often, the next questions are on lobbying, which is about, communicating, but I'm talking about experiential learning because there's something embedded in that, and that is relationship building. And it's really hard for somebody to say no to you when they have a relationship with you. Right? So that this takes, so I just wanted to put that out there.
I think that's a fabulous idea.
Right. So let's see how we can push that envelope. Yes?
It's funny when you said invite policymakers, politicians to come and see the space.
More than see the space.
To engage with it, to be a part of it.
For an entire month. Yes.
So I thought, what if it was not invite? What if it was a little bit more mandatory as part of their role as a public servant? Because from our perspective, we invited our council person for many years, and she's never even been to Elizabeth Street Garden. The one who wanted to destroy it. The new one. the new
We're not going to mention any names.
I won't drop it. But the council person who wants to save it actually was a volunteer.
Look at that. Mm-hmm.
And so, if it was a little bit more mandatory, and it can be mandatory in an open way, it can be mandatory as part of the role as a public servant.
Right.
And I do think it's crucial to come see the space, because we said that to De Blasio too, and he never ended up coming. But it's crucial for them to come and engage, put faces to the place that is the community, because elected officials love the word community. I would implore them to really explore what that means sometimes.
Yes.
They check off the boxes.
Wendy,
I was just going to add, in a coastal community like ours, it adds even more importance, this experiential education, because it helps us learn work skills, it builds capacity, and it helps us gain trust with our neighbors, with others in the community, with elected officials. We need this for our next storm, and so that's what I call social surge protection. We don't have it very strongly in this neighborhood, even though we have over 50 gardens right now. To me, that's one of the big questions at the 10-year mark for Sandy. Are we doing a better job of building resiliency on a social level? And to me, these green spaces and gardens are right at the core of all that.
I want to add something there. I think working with elected officials is key. And that's something that we train and do workshops with our community gardeners. You need to build a relationship with your elected officials. And I think you're right. In addition to that, I think we're very lucky at this point. We have so much new blood in the new council, and many of them are actually gardeners and compost advocates. So this is your right time to connect with them and work with them and bring them to these spaces. That's also part of my job, taking them to those spaces, not only in Manhattan, but also in other boroughs, because thinking about equity. There are other spaces that are not well built like this one, or don't have the capacity, don't have access to resources. My role is to bring them to the space that really need the help today, now, for food access, open space access. So before we go on to the next topic, education. Yes, it's priority number one for us. We have a new partnership, not a new partnership, we have a long-standing partnership with Grow NYC, Department of Education, with the school gardening program. And we have over 800 school gardens in DOE property. And I think there's opportunity for us to expand that and support that. So thinking beyond that, the idea of apprenticeship programs, workforce development. There are so much things to do in these spaces. Like you, Ray, in Harlem, in the South Bronx, working with with the kids, with the youth coming out of incarceration, those alternative programs. We need more of those to provide more trades training, gardening program, farming programs into these spaces. We have the space. These are our labs. So that's my
thank you. So perfect, Gene. I'm glad you raised your hand because actually it's Gene and Jack, the two J's. Joseph has already, the third J has already weighed in. But we're talking about meaningful and resonant communication that has impact. Gene, you have a background and having been involved in lobbying,
Yes.
communicating via lobbying, wondering if you could share some of your cumulative wisdom over the years in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely.
As it relates to GreenSpace.
Yeah, I mean, I worked for 15 years full-time at a lobbying firm. One of our clients we worked extensively was the Brooklyn Bridge Park Conservancy, as an example. That area 15 years ago, if you're familiar with it at all, was desolate. Nothing was there, absolutely like zero. It was through the hard work of not just executive director Mariana Koval, I think she's over at NYU now, but with her persistence, working with not just us, her lobbying firm, but with local elected officials. We went to Albany so many times to do all-day lobbying days with the elected officials to tell them about like the different peers and the development, the educational programming, the funding that we needed, like just on a persistent, like, you know, basis. Like you have to be like a strategic pest, if you will, like a pest that's like a
Squeaky wheel.
Yeah, a squeaky wheel, but you do it in a way that's like, you know, like engaging and making them listen and not forget about you, because elected officials, you have to remember, have 1,000 different issues coming at them every single day. And if you're not persistent about it, your issue gets pushed to the back burner. Mariana, as an example, and I give this example because unfortunately, without a central person looking at the entire city holistically, each neighborhood that has this type of persistent advocate are the ones that see the most fruits of their labor. And today, Brooklyn Bridge Park, that went from zero, is now a bustling waterfront with, you know, like, you know, courts and basketball courts, even a cricket court. We met with the city council so many times, engaging them and asking them what should be added on the waterfront, what should be taken out. We went through an extensive editing process with them, but that made them invested in the project. And they have like summer hip hop yoga, outdoor, the Brooklyn Bridge Park movies in the park. They have a vast array of programming that engages all constituencies of people. So there's something there for everyone. So just as a case study, we, you know, with Mariana and her persistence, was able to engage all of the local elected officials. We invited them to so many events in the waterfront, and they came. We had the governor there at one point. I mean, you know, it really became a focal point. I mean, and through that activity and engagement and persistence, that's how the Brooklyn Bridge Park waterfront is what it is today. Is because of that consistent, persistent, you know, strategic activity, engaging, keeping this issue in the forefront of their minds, engaging them. If they said no to one activity or they said no to this, we would work around it and go, what are you interested in? What would make you say yes to this? How could we get funding for this? What do we, you know, it was just single-minded determination, which, you know, it's not easy, but this is what happened in that case study, and that is why it went from zero to this bustling waterfront it is today. And if you don't do that type of persistence, unfortunately, the city doesn't do it for you. So the only way to, unfortunately, until we get, there's talks of having this central officer of the public realm, which I think would encompass what you're talking about. I don't know where they are in the stages of developing something like that. That would be like a strategic planning officer, which they have in London, Hong Kong. Every major city in the world apparently has something like that, except for New York City, that actually looks out for the interests of community gardens, public, the plazas, the waterfronts, everything. Imagine having one person speaking up within the administration on behalf of GreenSpace, you know, and not having to always constantly come at it from the outside. There'd be somebody centrally located. But until we get that person, you know, what has worked as an example for Brooklyn Bridge Park Conservancy is that consistent engagement, activity, never saying no, never taking no as an answer. It was a way they got it done, and that's why you see what it is today. If you ever have a chance to go out there, it's amazing, especially if you go back and look at old pictures of what it looked like 15 plus years ago. It's really amazing, a success story.
So thank you very much, Jean. I'm going to move to Jack, but before I do, just to get Jack's 60 plus years of wisdom in this area about speaking on lobbying, I just wanted to, for your consideration, really think about what Jean said, and I just want to introduce what I would call an equity lens consideration, and that is there is something going on globally in municipalities and cities. It's known as greentrification, green gentrification, meaning the neighborhoods are realizing open space developments, but it's in partnership with real estate developments that are gentrifying. So, you know, yes, there are these amenities. When we look at, you know, certain communities, they're not happening. And then when we do see them happening, we have to consider, okay, why is that happening? Is it because the neighborhood is being, you know, gentrified? So we have to look at this from with an equity lens. And I bring this up because the city, again, I'm going to lift up the city of Seattle, uses an equity lens when they're making decisions around greening. You know, so that's a pretty sophisticated approach to really say, hey, are we really democratizing the greening of space in our city? So I just wanted to, you know, add that for your consideration. Jack, if you will, please, your sense of...
a second on that topic, because we could spend a whole day just talking about the impacts of green space, either as threat, that is a gentrifying tool or weapon, or the equity issue of, well, why shouldn't the poor neighborhood have something as nice as the rich neighborhood? Because sometimes the people in the poor neighborhood are afraid that it will lead to gentrification. Yep. It's an enormous dilemma for people who are on that gentrification edge of life. And there's no clear-cut, gee, if we just do this, everything will work out. Or if we just do that. It's a crapshoot, frankly, as to how things will work out. Quickly, to follow up to Jean's comments about the czar, if you will, whatever title we want to give this person, of green space in the city. Perhaps one of the 6 deputy mayors appointed by Mayor Adams, and I would suggest the possibility of Maria Torres Springer or Sheena Wright as one of the people that might take on that role as something that could get rather quickly within this administration if the mayor wanted to do it. Without any further legislation or anything else, that could go for a later period. Lobbying generally. You said something very significant before when you mentioned disagreeing with people and continuing to work with them. Throughout my career, part of my job was often to say no. And yet I'm still here today. I got invited here today by people that sometimes I had to say no to. That's building relationships. It is as important as anything else that we can do to advance our cause over time. But let me quickly say this. One of the great successes of the parks advocates and community gardeners in the city has been that they have been very good at organizing. Another excellent organization at organizing has been the Industrial Areas Foundation,
wow.
started by Saul Alinsky. He wrote a famous book, Rules for Radicals,
yes.
which I kept on my desk throughout my career. And I dealt from time to time, when I was in government, with one of the Industrial Areas Foundation chapters here in the city. Sometimes they used me as target practice, but even in retirement, I maintained my relationship, and occasionally they have used me as an advisor since I've retired from the city. But that's a perfect example, my personal one with you guys and Charlie, and that one, of what ideally we can accomplish when we're dealing with the government. And I'm going to give you, since I pull them out of my pocket here, a handful of Lynn's laws for lobbyists, as opposed to Alinsky's rules for radicals. Start with this one. The people that you deal with in the
I'm
government.
going to stand up and
I can speak up, I say.
Yeah.
The people you deal with in government are as smart, as honest, and as well-intentioned as you are. Even if you don't believe that, although I do, even if you don't believe that, it is in your interest to act as if you do. Similarly, every one of your elected officials has a PhD in politics. Maybe not in what you might like them to have a PhD in, but in politics they have a PhD. You have to respect that. That's how they got elected and possibly re-elected over and over again. They know some things that you don't know about what is possible in their world. And unless you're successful in throwing them out of office, you have to learn how to talk to them in a way that advances your cause. Whether or not it's their cause, you can make it their cause if they fear you because you're well organized. Keep in mind that your goal when you're dealing with a government rep is not to make a sale. It is to make relationships, which hopefully over time can lead to multiple sales. Any salesperson will tell you they depend on repeat business, and that's what we want. Repeat business with the people who occupy the halls of government, whether civil servants, appointed people, or elected people. We're going to run into them again. They're going to run into us again. We'll see to that. You want to be able to deal with them over time to get what you want. Third, speak their language. As long as Democrats are in charge of things, which they are right now, nationally, at the state level, and at the city level, you can talk about climate change as you describe the project for which you're advocating. Once the Republicans take charge, as they probably will at one or two levels of government after the November elections, you're going to start describing that same project as flood control, because that's their language, they understand it, and they might help you get what you want. Same project, different language. If you go to a restaurant in France, you would like snails, you don't order snails. What do you order?
Escargot.
Yes, exactly. You speak their language, not your language. Fourth, understatement is, I find, very useful in what I do. Every day I get solicitations, U.S. mail, email, people asking me for money. And if you don't send money by midnight tonight, all of the honeybees will die. Or the polar bears, or the whales, or the children. Somebody's going to die if I don't send money by midnight tonight. Of course, after I finish writing all those checks, I realize I don't have any money left to buy groceries. Now I'm going to die. The reality is there are many demands placed on all of your elected officials when they're making budgeting decisions. You want something from them, but you can't have everything. You have to understand that there are limits to what you can expect to get. And there are valid reasons for that. It is better when you're trying to make your sale, don't offend people, as they always do to me, I mean, it goes immediately to the round container when I get those things that try to say everything is a cataclysm and the world will end tomorrow if I don't do X, Y, or Z. The world may not be better off if I don't do X, Y, or Z, but it's not going to end tomorrow. Not yet, anyway. Maybe the day after tomorrow. Final point. On your shopping list when you go to your elected officials, be sure to include some things that can be accomplished quickly without controversy. Because the window of opportunity, both politically and financially, it opens and abruptly it closes. Again, wait till November. Some of our windows of opportunity may be slamming shut for a while. But that keeps going throughout my career, Charlie's career, Ray's career. The window goes open, it goes closed, it goes open. We have to do business regardless of where the damn window is. Sometimes you try to sneak under the door, tunnel into the house, whatever the hell it is. But the political situation right now is helpful to us, supportive of us at all three levels of government. And everybody is talking in budget terms about doing things that we want, funding things that we want. But we're dealing with inherited deficits at all three levels of government. We're dealing with rising inflation, so that whatever money you do have buys less. We're talking about interest rates, so the money that we borrow to build things is more expensive, and debt service chews up a bigger portion of the city's budget that we'd rather have applied to parks. There are bad things potentially down the line. We will survive them, and that window will open up again, and we will learn how to do business with the bad guys. You know, the ones who aren't our natural allies, when they understand that, gee, maybe it is a good idea. My kid likes to go to the playground, but speak their language when you're trying to make the sale. That's it for now.
Thank you. What I'd like to do is to open up to our audience, and I see multiple hands here. 1, 2. Let's go this way. The gentleman here, then the woman right here, and we will 3.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. 1, 2, and 3.
You missed one.
Yes. Oh, Barbara. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Very good. Please.
Greetings. My name is Ian Knife, local artist. I'm part of the Green Oasis Community Garden. It's a community garden that was started up by an artist, sculptor. And what I've noticed since I moved to New York from Colorado was the story of the community gardens and their birth. It was a bunch of homeless folk and a bunch of artists who came and reclaimed these spaces, right? And we look now, at the time we end right now, there's not one of them homeless people here or people of color, right? None of them, right here. And it's the same thing, you go to all the community gardens. The people of color are no longer part of these groups, and the artists are kind of in the background. You've got Lungs, who's standing up for artists, creating events, art events. So my deal is, artists are moving out of the Lower East Side. This is one of the coolest artist communities. Basquiat roamed around here, Andy Warhol. Why are the community gardens not having an artist residency program? The Green Thumb needs to spend money to put up a shed, the same place where artists can put their artwork, artists can come, teach classes. I did that for 1 whole year as an experiment to see how it will work. I committed a whole year, 2 years, in Green Oasis and in 6BC. I carved underneath a tree, sitting on the ground, doing stone sculpture. And the response I got was amazing. I had people coming to me and asking me to teach classes. So I've done workshops in all the community gardens, paper mache with little kids. I started getting parents inviting me to teach their kids graffiti at their kids' birthday parties in the garden, right? So now artists need to find a way to stay. We need to keep the artists in the Lower East Side. Artists shouldn't be moving upstate to get away from the high rents and the lack of work in New York City. So the city, Green Thumb, the community garden, I've presented this to many of the gardens to create an artist residency program. something that is meaningful. It's gonna give the artist a place to work. I can't afford to rent a studio. I've been here 5 years. I can't afford a studio. I live in a small apartment that is already packed with all of my artwork, right? So that's the only reason I came here today, was to put my word out for the artist community of the Lower East Side. We can't let the artists leave the neighborhood. We can't let them move to Brooklyn. We can't let artists be doing the artwork on a park bench in Tompkins Square Park, when this is our land. This is our land, and we need to be able to make this land, the local artists, the community, all benefit. It's just like it's a big cycle. Everybody will be happy at the end of the day, right? And then another thing, I smoke weed, and 420 is here now. Weed is legal in New York. I know a lot of people who visited the gardens. I've seen followers standing up there smoking a cigarette. All these groups of people wanted to come and smoke and sit and smoke a joint in the community garden, right? And I had to tell them, you can't smoke in the garden. You got to keep going. So how are we going to modify and keep up with the times? You know, because that has been a tool of discriminating on the minorities. Is, yeah, those guys are probably smoking weed back there because it's some Mexicanos or a bunch of black guys, right? They smoking weed, they doing drugs. So we need to find a way to move with the time. The legalization is here. It's a beautiful place to kind of sit and smoke in the garden and get inspired, you know, because I think that's what a lot of artists are looking for. Come sit here, smoke a joint, listen to the birds, and go and create some beautiful artwork. So I'm just saying,
thank you.
Speaking from an artist's point of view,
thank you.
Elizabeth Street Community Garden, more power to you guys, man. More power. Luta continua with the struggle, man.
Thank you.
Can I say something to that?
Please.
So something there with the residency and with the artists. I'm an artist. My partner's an artist. A lot of our volunteers are artists, and one of the biggest issues is in terms of the programs, and we've been very successful. We've been fortunate with it. Is the funding of it, right? So something that we did. I've used it as an example to it. Musicians, right? Local musicians. It's tough in Lower Manhattan, very big musical community. Very tough to get your work out there. Very tough to find performances, and then to get paid for it. And so what we did is we created a live music program where we promote them, and we offer this space, and it's free. And that's kind of it's all very symbiotic. Right. People walk by, they hear music, they come in, they learn, they want to support the garden. They start to talk to the volunteers, but also the musician is promoting their work they're playing, and we're fortunate enough to where we have some money. We'd like to have more money to be able to delegate it towards that. So programs like that, where it is the call to artists that I mentioned before, where I wasn't sure if you were here, but where we promote the artwork, it's essential, and it is funding. So having funds from the city strictly for that, funds that can be used. The community gardens are very much reflective of their community, and so I think that if the city is delegating funds for that, or if the nonprofits that manage them can have funds for that, creating it open, but the free and the open to the public is crucial when it comes to the platform for the artist, because that in turn makes the promotion easy, but it invites people in, as opposed to like you go by Rockwood Music Hall, which is nice. It's where a lot of musicians will first go, and they charge it. They need to raise the money, so they charge it, but not as many people see it. Right. So it doesn't. It's a specific niche of the community, as opposed to
And one more point is that
let's do this, because there are other folks that I'd like to give a chance. We only have 10. Yes, in the interest of time.
I'll be brief.
Yes.
So, thank you for the question. Actually, 5 years ago, we restarted the Arts in the Gardens program. So please connect with me. We support artists in gardens and to do projects. Very recently, we did murals on tool sheds. Right. Number two, unfortunately, cultivation and use of drugs in the garden is still prohibited. I understand. I think to Lynn's point, if you want to make change of those policies or legislation, elected officials.
Okay.
So thank you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Pat Russell, and I've been in this garden for close to 4 years, and we have people that claim that we are probably, as a whole, one of the most successful grassroots movements on the planet. And it's, it as a decentralized movement, we accomplished amazing things. And now, all these years later, we're still creating theater on our stages, art and murals and everything, that goes along with community gardening. We have community. Now, I've also worked with the Industrial Areas Foundation in the early 90s here in this neighborhood. And we learned organizing techniques for approaching our elected officials that, really tried to inform them of our desire to turn our relationship on its ear and let them understand that they are our elected officials. We put them in place and we can take them out again. And I would ask you what you think about this movement now to centralize control of our gardens and find a czar and give over our individual identities and power for the expediency of talking to our elected officials. Or would you advise otherwise?
I'm not sure what proposal you're referring to. If you're talking about what was said over here, that was intended entirely differently. It had no intent, some of us have discussed this before, no intent of being a regulatory agent. This was to be an advocacy agent within city government on behalf of the creation of more green public space. Had nothing to do with the fear that the comment evoked in your mind.
It did.
Okay. Totally different intent.
I want to add to that. Yes, thank you for that great question. I think GreenSpace is always cherishing, it celebrates the idea that these gardens are managed independently. They're governed by a group of people, and we always step back, right? The idea of the director of public realm is an advocacy effort from many groups, including the Municipal Art Society, to have that office sitting in City Hall to advocate and coordinate with different agencies. As you know, plazas are managed by DOT, parks are managing parks, and community gardens. Waterfront is who manage waterfront. Yeah. So it's the idea of coordinating all these different agencies to advocate for the public space, all the public commons. So I hear your concerns, but I think the idea is they don't have any type of governance over the spaces.
When you see that term in writing, it's REALM, public realm, an old-fashioned term for the kingdom.
Thank you. So yes.
So I live in Manhattan Valley, and I've seen over 20 years that I've lived there that there were a lot more community gardens in the beginning, and as the neighborhood has gentrified, many of those have disappeared to give way to buildings. And it seems really obvious to me that those developers were just waiting for the neighborhood to kind of get to a point where it made sense for them to build. And so I guess I'm wondering, how do you, and I was going to say also that the communities are transitional, so maybe people don't feel empowered enough to advocate for those gardens. But I guess the question is, how do you convince developers that this is something valuable? Because it seems like in New York, the developers just rule. And how do you convince them, how do you tie it to the value of property to say, these are the things that draw people to the neighborhood? And is that doable in a place like New York City?
You're asking me?
I'm asking anyone.
Glass half empty, glass half full. That's what you just described. The community gardens were never intended to be permanent. They were intended to be a temporary use of space that was abandoned by failed landlords during difficult economic times, and they surrendered title to the city of New York, which didn't know what to do with it. times were bad. The city couldn't afford to maintain these properties. They didn't want them, but they took them over. And with some encouragement, they ultimately allowed members of the public who'd been throwing seed bombs over the fences to create community gardens. There are now 500 community gardens in this city. They are not threatened. We're past that point of moving from, wait a minute, we're past that point. Anyone at any time, yes, something odd can happen. But of the inventory of community gardens that we used to have, all of which were temporary as a matter of law, now those that have been developed as they were always intended to be, right? Describe some of the ones that you have, and they're throughout the city that has occurred. But it didn't happen the way it was initially intended, that all of them were going to go that way because of the Community Garden Coalition and its representatives, its members, its gardeners over the years. There was pushback against every single mayor. There was pushback against development of those properties. And many of them now are not going to be developed. So if you have 500, which is the largest inventory, I believe, of community gardens in any city in the country, now protected, I call that a success story. That glass is at least half full.
How do you convince a developer not to develop?
He has no right to develop. You have to convince the city to deny him that right to develop, which the city has now done. We went through this whole elaborate process during the beginning of the Bloomberg administration to sort out the gardens between development sites and saved sites, and a section in the middle that was subject to further community discussion and debate. And that inventory we've now worked through, the entire inventory. Now there are some gardens which have been created much more recently after that occurred, where there is still that kind of issue. But pre-existing gardens, the issue is over.
I think, if I may, just assert my privilege as moderator, because we are at time. But there is something that I want to suggest, that it's a fundamental governance issue. Meaning, what I mean by that is, who's making the decisions, right? And if decisions are being made that are impacting you, right? Let's say for better or for worse. In this case, for worse. We have a couple of examples here. Where is your say in that? Meaning that we talked about the resonant relationships. A genuine humanizing and cultivation of a real meaning, a place of meaning in one's life. That is not something that is lends itself to traditional quantification. But does that mean that that's not a relevant consideration? What I'm getting at, actually, is that community gardens reflect community. And what that means, that's not in the lexicon. That doesn't find itself in the lexicon of city regulations right now. What we do, the coalition, is to really lift up, and I appreciate Carlos mentioning, celebrating the diversity and the autonomy of community gardens. But how do we push that envelope? One thing that I would just want to put out to everybody, we have 3 branches of government ostensibly. The legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. I would like to suggest that there is a 4th branch that is not recognized as such, but that is wielding tremendous consequential power over communities, and it's the administrative. They are not elected. We didn't choose them. We didn't choose HPD. HPD bulldozed 6 community gardens in El Barrio, right, citing a 40-year-old urban renewal designation. This was in 2015. And the gardens have been around for 30 plus years, right? Somebody here was telling me about a garden I don't know how many years it was. Somebody here was talking about a garden forever. So, how do we push that envelope to, so I think it's incumbent upon us as community, yes, to become policy literate, but also to really, without apology, continue to lift up. Community is, community lives matter. Community matters, right? We can talk about redlining, we can talk about urban renewal, we can talk about, the government never came in and said, hey, do you mind if we redline your community? Do you mind if we urban renewal your community in the name of slum clearance? Do you mind if we cut services even while your community is being burnt down by landlords? Do you mind if we do that? Never asked us. So there's an issue. It's a de facto form of disenfranchisement where one is not, enfranchisement means you're choosing, you're electing. So decisions are being made by folks which I think need to be balanced with community input. So we need to be present. We have to show up at city council hearings. We have to show up at community board meetings. I mean, in numbers, in great numbers. We have to make a lot of noise, and then some, sometimes direct action. So I just wanted to suggest that. What I wanted to do, yes?
Barbara has a question.
Oh, Barbara, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please, I'm sorry, Barbara.
It's a very specific, practical question, but I think it affects other gardens.
Yes.
I belong to a 40-year-old community garden. It's called the Guardia Corner Gardens. It's near NYU. We are threatened. We were initially threatened with development, the NYU project. They have decided that for right now, they are not going to build on the land that's right next to us. We are on DOT land. We are zoned as roadbed and cannot be built on, but they wanted to use our garden as a staging area for their construction equipment during this project. Okay, and we went through this whole process of hammering out an agreement with them and all this stuff. And then they decided that they're not going to build for now, but they're going to give the land to the city to build a school on. And all of a sudden, like any agreement that we had with NYU, doesn't exist. So where do we begin addressing this issue? Because we've been told that construction on the school could begin as early as next year, and that the city will just come in and bulldoze us in the middle of the night. We're a 40-year-old garden, and people every single day come and thank us for gardening this space. It's an area where there are very few parks. Washington Square Park is noisy and dangerous, and so parents with young children and elderly people all want to come and sit in our garden because it's safe. And it's like, how do we impress upon our government officials that this space has value, that it's not a vacant lot to be used as a construction staging area?
That is not an easy.
No, the school would be next to us. We have welcomed school groups through our entire history, and we love teachers and students. We would set aside part of the garden for the school, but we just don't want to bulldoze.
That's a very difficult question from the city's perspective, from the urban planning perspective, the balance of green space and urban policy, right? I think you have heard from the experts here about the lobby part, and I think that's very important. And I think the idea of how you can sell your garden as unique, that was another takeaway for me from today.
We're building a butterfly house.
And also, I remember the garden has hosted the Youth Leadership Council with Green Thumb. This is a space for education. It's a space for the community. I think I'm linking all the dots here. Youth development, entrepreneurship. I think there's a way for you to connect with your elected officials at that level and speaking the same language. Those are the selling points, and maybe those are small wins, and then you can have the bigger win of preserving the garden. I won't be able to speak more because the garden is currently under DOT jurisdiction, but I can, it would be like under our jurisdiction, we have very strict like regulations about construction, for example, and protections.
We've been trying to get transferred into parks for 40 years.
Right, but I think don't feel discouraged. I'm saying like the battle continues.
So,
I'm removing myself the city hat right now. Like try to advocate for the transfer of jurisdiction.
how do they do that? How do they do that?
I understand that when gardens were initially, when these gardens were first formed, and the city said, okay, you can have it temporarily. But at what point, after 40 years, at what point does the city say this has value? I mean, we have a collection of heirloom rose varieties, some of which there are only 3 of them in North America. We have, just like amazing, unique plants. We do educational programs.
Can I ask you a question? What puzzles me is this idea that they're going to replace the gardens by a parking lot for their machinery. Because we see all those flowers coming up in our street.
Well,
They don't need any
told us
space
that.
to put their machinery. So I wonder if you have also looked for engineers, advising the city on how they can build that parking pool without destroying the next
Well, they can.
garden.
There is open space on the other side of the sidewalks built.
So let's continue the sidebar.
Okay, no, I do understand.
City council. The council. I'm working with the advocates like to see things.
The other thing, it took 17 years to get
I do transfer all
back.
I'm just saying that DOT because they're in charge.
Louder, Carolyn.
It took 17 years to get Carmen Pabon de la Monacer back as a community gardener.
Yes.
Okay, we did that because Margarita had nailed the city to make them give us the developer sign an agreement at the city council. Okay, it was a long, drawn-out, nasty fight, to put it bluntly. But at any rate, it persevered. The thing got lost, and then we went forward. But going on to that, first and foremost, we need to thank 6&B Garden for hosting this. And I want to thank each and every one of the panelists for coming and supporting this.
Thank
what
you
I would
very
like
much.
to suggest is that we continue this dialogue and organize other events like this for the community to come forward and to be able to speak about what the issues are, the need for green space in New York City, how to make it relevant. One of the other things that I think we need to do based on what's been said is to reach out to the local universities and ask them to include in their planning and policy classes an introduction to green space and the need for it in New York City. That would be Parsons, New School, NYU, just to name a few, like right down
I
here.
do that at Pratt.
Right, and you
Teach
do
that
it
at Pratt,
and
yes.
Parsons. I mean, these are all neighborhood, in our neighborhood, but in each one of your neighborhoods, there are universities. You have City College, Wendy?
Right. I'm just saying, all of our gardens have also been studied by many students, right? There's no single repository that I know of all those that's one of the things we've been talking about with Morris, right? One place where all these studies, and that's also valued. And I don't know if you're doing citizen science with NYU or other students. That's another thing that could happen.
Yeah, but it's just sort of like one of the things that was talked about is the need for policymakers, urban planners to have an experience of what green space is like, what community needs, and how it impacts on the health of the city. It's not just about tall buildings. That's not what makes New York City work. Okay? It's a mixture of many different people coming from many different points of view, and that we will not survive if we don't care for the environment. That is the whole critical point. None of us will be here. None of the bugs, birds, whatever, if we keep going in the path that we're going in right now. We need to educate people about the importance of green space, about how to grow food, and to our relationship to the whole environment. It's critical. And so I would like to see this continue as an ongoing discussion. And we're open, if Jack could post his lobby, we'll post it on the website so you can download it. And Jean, if you could post the link to that case study for the Brooklyn Bridge, that would be really helpful. If anybody else has suggestions of what we could post online, that's a link. The video will be posted on YouTube for the event. Many thanks to Anna Pastor, who has taped it. And I want to thank each and every one of you for coming and for your commitment and interest to preserving green space in New York City.
So we have critical environmental areas. This is a current project. It's a bill being introduced at the state Senate level by Senator Comrie, C-O-M-R-I-E, and it's about elevating the status of community gardens in order to enhance protections against development. So right now the bar is relatively low when the city decides is there going to be an impact. And so this raises the bar on impact. So I'm going to send to Charles Crizell all the information about the bill, as well as all the information. It's called Critical Environmental Areas, designating community gardens as part of the city's critical infrastructure going forward. So just wanted to let you know that there are some initiatives, and we are looking to substantively bring enhanced protections for all of the reasons that everyone here is articulating.
So I think we should thank the panel for the So thank you all so very much.
Thank you.
And thank you to Caroline for
wrangling
this into being.